lots of spoddy kids saying, "Oh, it's not as good as my Doctor Who," and by which they mean, Matt Smith and some stuff that feels like it's 5 minutes ago is now ancient history, just like it was to me. I'm writing the second series at the moment, and I realise how often you just have to make the detective clever just by people saying the tears. That's the trick. With Martin and Benedict are obviously very busy always. And we haven't managed to do it. How they changed? Well, it's a very interesting sort of journey, really. The first one, which was 2013, Tractate Midath, came about because I was asked by BBC Arts to do a documentary about M.R. James, and it was the busiest year I've ever had. I wrote 2 episodes of Doctor Who, An Adventure in Space and Time. And I was doing a play. It was crazy. And I literally said, there's nothing I'd like more, but I haven't got the time. And they kept asking. And eventually I said, I'll do it on one condition, which is I can do an adaptation of one of the stories. And that's how we did it. We actually siphoned as much money away from the documentary as possible into the drama. And we had what is now extraordinary. We had a whole week to do it. We had a steam train, shot it in Manchester. And then it was a big success, and I obviously wanted to carry on. But as I've always said, the problem is the half-hour play slot really doesn't exist. It is a 70s slot; it's gone. So trying to get the money to do a half hour of non-anthology television is very hard. So I kept asking and persisting, and eventually Cassian Harrison, who was controller of BBC 4, said, "Can you do it for X amount?" I won't say how much because it wasn't very much. And I did The Dead Room in 3 days with a cast of 3 in 2018. And it's kind of been sort of re-established almost every year since then, apart from COVID. So it's been a very interesting journey to keep that tradition alive. And I suppose keep it moving forward. Well, I think it's very important. I've never, for instance, it's called Woman of Stone, not A Woman of Stone. I'm doing it now. It's called Woman of Stone because it's an adaptation of Man Size and Marble. It's actually first ghost story I ever read, but it's quite slight. It's quite small, and I thought I can do something quite interesting with this. I think it's essentially about domestic violence. I think that's what it's about. I think it's about her husband is extremely controlling in the story, and I thought there are things I can tease out of this. So it's quite interesting. Jonathan Miller, who did the very first one, although it wasn't at Christmas, it was on in July, which is called Whistle and I'll Come to You, not Oh Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad, because it was an adaptation. And I think that's the key to it, is to preserve the author's intent, but you can often be playful with it, or indeed just make it long enough. Some of the great ones, one of my absolute favourites from the 70s, Lawrence Gordon Clark's Treasure of Abbot Thomas, has a whole section about fake spiritualism, which isn't in the story, but establishes the kind of rational credentials of the leading man, Michael Bryan, so that when you see him start to unravel, you know where you're starting from. So I'm very keen to try and preserve as much of the original as possible, because there's a reason we're doing it, is because they're very good stories, but also I have great respect for the original writers. Yes, always, but the BBC have been incredibly supportive. BBC Arts have been absolutely amazing. And to be honest, I took a chance last year. I decided to go public and say, I think this might be the last one. Because genuinely what happened last year was Lucy Worsley, God bless her, did a documentary about Arthur Conan Doyle. And they said, if you can do a Conan Doyle story, I think we can find a bit of money. And I said, of course I'll do a Doyle story. But it was like that. And I thought, well, unless Lucy's going to do one about E.F. Benson or E. Nesbit, then that's it. So I thought, well, I'm just going to tell everyone how difficult it is. And it's not for want of trying or anyone's will. It's just hard. Budgets are shrinking everywhere. The broadcasting environment is very fractured and strange. So trying to get this. But amazingly, after last year's success, they just said yes this year. And so I'm hoping that the future is very rosy. Doctor Who, everything. But the weird thing is there's Man Size in Marble, the original story, this story permeates the rest of me, and it's in one of my last Doctor Who, the Empress of Mars with Peter Capaldi. There is the tomb of the Ice Warrior Empress comes alive precisely because of the story. So it's always been there. And then Doctor Who itself, I mean, it pops up everywhere, really does still. And I was talking about my sort of early moments of terror, and they're all Doctor Who, really. And long may it continue. It's petrifying. Time, as the Doctor might say, is petrifying. I don't know where it goes. I mean, it is 20 years since The Unquiet Dead was shot, so that's 21 years since it was announced the Doctor Who was coming back, and it's the idea of an entire era of the modern show being almost as long as the original run is ridiculous, but that's how it goes, isn't it? And it's very exciting to think that it's still going strong, and an entirely new generation has grown up in that way. Lots of spotty kids saying, "Oh, it's not as good as my Doctor Who," and by which they mean, Matt Smith and some stuff that feels like it's 5 minutes ago is now ancient history, just like it was to me. I'll never forget that one of the red letter days of my life was going to W.H. Smith's in Middlesbrough in 1972, 73, and my mum buying me the Radio Times 10th anniversary special for the Three Doctors. It's still, I've got 2 copies. It's a magical artifact, but the stories of the first 2 Doctors were printed in sepia and green, and it was like looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were like 6 years old, some of these stories, but it was an impossibly distant past, And I suppose even with technology being so different and things being terribly available, some of that must feel quite hazy in a way, doesn't it? It certainly does to me. It feels like a different life, really. No one's asked me. Well, I always say I had a wonderful run. I did 9 or 10 stories, and then Adventure in Space and Time, which was such an amazing culmination of everything for me about what I love about Doctor Who, but also the last thing I did was I was in Peter Capaldi's last story, a regeneration story with David Bradley, the actor I'd cast as the first Doctor, and I was playing the Brigadier's grandfather. I remember thinking, I think this may be where I should step off, because it's not really going to get any better than this. So that's kind of how I feel. I mean, I tell you what's really lovely is I genuinely just watch the show like a viewer again, and I really like that, because it is different. When you work on something you love, it changes your relationship. It inevitably changes. So it's very exciting just to sort of see what happens. I don't really know much about this special. Stephen sent me it a while ago, but I think it changed quite a bit. So I'm just looking forward to watching it. But as I say, not on Christmas Day, or not later on Christmas Day, because otherwise I will genuinely be transformed into an 8-year-old version of me, sitting this close to the television, shouting at my family, and somewhere in the background the ghost of my mother saying, "She's program's on." I think it's an interesting thing, because I genuinely, I want to keep it moving forward. It's not just an exercise in nostalgia. There's a reason why it feels right Christmas Eve, and this got lots of candles. It looks very beautiful, and there's something about it which presses a button for us all. But equally, it's kind of exciting to try and change things up a bit. When I did the Dead Room in 2018, the whole idea was it's a ghost from the 70s, and I literally I was sort of then dramatizing M.R. James's rules on how to do it. One of which is the ghost should be from about 30 or 40 years ago, not too far back. And so therefore, literally one of the characters says, "Would a ghost from the 70s work?" I'm trying to make it happen. So it's good to try and push it forward. And the great Lawrence Gordon Clark, who did the 70s classics, they did M.R. James. He did M.R. James, and then he did Dickens, and then they did 2 brand new ones, original stories. And it's really interesting to think about it in those sort of terms. But equally, there's something lovely about the tradition, that it feels right. But doing Doyle and then E. Nesbit this year, it's also lovely to spread the field a bit. Well, it's my detective series, which I've wanted to do for a very long time. It's called Bookish. I play an antiquarian bookseller in London, 1946, naturally shot in Belgium. And I solve crimes essentially by reference to all the books in my shop, which is like a sort of analog computer, as it were. I'm just very clever. I'm writing the second series at the moment, and I realize how often you just have to make the detective clever just by people saying the tears. That's the trick. And then you knock out all the bits in between which make him not clever. That's how Sherlock Holmes used to do it. So I'm very excited about it. It's on next year on Alibi, and it's a 6-parter with me and Polly Walker and Elliot Levy, and we've got amazing guest stars, Danny Mays, Jolie Richardson, Paul McGann, and I've co-written it with Matthew Sweet. I'm very, very excited. It's something I've really wanted to do for an awfully long time, so it's very exciting. All that's missing really is a Radio Times cover. Well, we wanted to do a film. Stephen and I wanted to do a film, but with Martin and Benedict are obviously very busy always, and we haven't managed to do it. But we always said if we had a good idea, we'd do a film. We had a very good idea during lockdown. We did Zooms with both of them, and but that's as far as we've got. It is a good idea. It'd be really good to do a Sherlock film. But that's where we are, I'm afraid. You'll have to ask them. Why do you ask them? No, I will. I haven't yet. Yeah. I'm going to watch it over Christmas in one go, I think. I'm too busy watching The Day of the Jackal and all sorts of other things. I'm very much excited about seeing it. It was such a shame. I mean, honestly, not kidding. It's 8 years since the first one, and I would bump into someone from the cast all the time over the past 8 years, and everyone was, have you heard anything? And we'd talk about it. And then Peter Kuzminski came to see me in the play, and he said, I was hoping we might work something out. He said, we can't really, can we? He said, you're quite crucial to this play. I said, yes. And because it was shot, it wasn't even in London, it was such a killer. But I'm sure Alex Jennings will be brilliant. It was just a shame. But luckily, not everyone's come back. I think if I was the only person who hadn't made it, I would have been very sad. But a few people couldn't come back, so I don't feel so bad. But I'm very excited about seeing it.